So welcome. Hopefully you guys had a good night last night, kind of the first night of the JNUC, and hopefully you guys are all going to be able to plan or are planning on coming out tonight to the Jamf Nation or the JNUC party over at First Ave. So yeah, my name is Drew Dugan. I am the International Support Manager here at Jamf Software, and I'm here introducing David Wiles, who's from Y&R Group in Australia. So you're going to notice some stuff up on the screen that there are S's where there should be Z's or Z, like you would say. And so don't worry, it's not a typo, it's just how he spells. And he might also pronounce some words a little funny, but hopefully we can pound through this, and you guys don't have any issues understanding him. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to pass this over to David, and we'll just go through that. The presentation should probably be about maybe half hour, and then afterwards we'll have a Q&A section. So if you guys have any questions, just kind of keep those in mind, then you can ask those afterwards. And with that, here's David.
Hey guys, good morning. So this is a talk focusing around a project we're still in the middle of, but we've been working on for a while at Y&R Group. We've dubbed Casper One. Like Drew mentioned, my name's Dave. I've worked for Y&R Group for about 8 years, focusing on the Apple platform with a specific focus on managing our Macs. So Casper One, this is sort of the CIO slide. This is the high-level summary. We've used Casper at various levels within our organization for a long time. And we've got a lot of expertise, and this is about taking that to the next level. And which is about improving our IT offering. It's the standard Casper stuff, make it benefiting the business, etc. We think that in large enterprise, the norm is sort of poorly managed Macs. They tend to take care of the Windows side really well, but like we've probably heard, over the last few days and years, Macs are underserviced by IT admins generally. We aim to fix that within Y&R Group for sure. And we've been working with Jamf for a while, and this is probably the first rollout, according to them, in large enterprise, specifically using sites. So I thought I'll talk about Y&R and who we are. It's a complex organization. It's made up of 19 separate individual companies. Advertising, marketing, branding, PR, they all fall under Y&R Group umbrella. Some of those, you can't see them very well, but some of those you may recognize. Young and Rubicam, VML, Burst and Marcel, there's a couple of big ones on there. Not all the brands are Jamf customers, but we've got a long relationship with Jamf across many levels. We're owned by a larger entity called WPP, and these companies have run fairly independently. They have their own company-aligned CIO often, and there is a single group CIO. I just want to give you guys an idea of the complexity of what we're dealing with. And logistically, that's a map of our physical offices, and it's ignore the ones out in the Pacific Ocean there. It turns out the Google Maps API isn't perfect, although Iceland there is right. There's an office in Reykjavik that a few guys have been trying to get transferred to. So we're 300 plus physical buildings. We're represented in over 100 countries. We're talking about well over 20,000 users. And probably most importantly for this project, we have multiple entities represented by each dot or each pin on that map. For probably over 800 offices in total. So just quickly, just as a quick example, that Sydney office where I'm generally located, that little pin represents about 6 offices, physical offices in Sydney, and probably 15 brands in Sydney, so 15 separate companies across 6 offices. So 2013, this is what Y&R Group looked like in 2013. We have 20 independent JSS consoles. So they're managed by console owners that don't collaborate at all. They don't share resources. They don't, there's no sort of policies across all the consoles, and they do their own things. They don't relate to each other. About 30% of our fleet is managed, 12,500 plus, and that number is increasing. Inconsistent Mac skills. I guess that's a sort of a nice way to say that some of our offices don't have admins that can handle Macs, or handle is the wrong word, sorry, admins that excel in managing Macs. And that means, that sort of lends that 70% figure of unmanaged Macs. We got a requirement from our parent company, WPP. We had to encrypt all our Macs as soon as possible. So all our computers as soon as possible. We actually got that in a few years ago, and the Macs sort of, it's difficult, more difficult than the PCs, and they just sort of fell out of focus. And that's why our machines are encrypted, or were encrypted sparingly, and the keys were all over the place. The console owners would use push-out file vault 2 with an institutional key, individual keys. I got a report of a console owner who said that, a non-Casper site, and said their policy was they would run around to every Mac, generate a key on the spot, and write it down and put it in Excel. And that was the sort of stuff we're aiming to fix, because our Mac fleet is under more focus. We have a lot of policies that, policies like admin rights. It's a WP policy that no user has admin rights on their machine. Things like screensaver lockouts. These are policies that are set globally, but not adhered to because it's too difficult. So that means the Casper One project is born out of those issues. Visionary. I was made to put that in. Look, like I said, we've been using Casper for a long time on different levels. People can see what it can do. The powers that be saw that it can obviously solve this problem, and so we just started chatting to Jamf. We'd been using the betas. We've been thinking about this project for a few years. We knew with version 8 it wasn't possible because all those console owners, they're in silos and there's no collaboration. And we can't force collaboration across the globe like that, or we weren't game to. So we knew 8 couldn't help us out. We knew 9 was imminent. We were testing the betas, trying to poke Jamf and find out when it was being released. I think they're a bit like Apple, and they definitely wouldn't give us a date, but they sort of alluded to it being imminent. So we started planning, roughly, but what we came up with was the 2 phases. So part of the project was phase 1 was to all those existing consoles as they were to be brought into a single console. So there's no importing of databases. No one got to just transfer their stuff across. It was pretty much recreating from scratch, and it was a good chance to clean up those consoles. We found often anyway, and all those 70% of machines that weren't managed, they had the management framework put on them, but only used for encryption. We weren't game to push out any packages or policies at this point. That's part of phase 2. And these phases are sort of running concurrently. So it all came down to sites. That was the way that it was going to be implemented. That's the way that we'd manage those silos, or at least that's the way we could still use those silos. And it's just a matter of how we did it. We do it by physical sites, by regions, countries, companies, continents. We got all sorts of options. And I think it really comes down to your organisational structure. We thought, and this is our words, not Jamf's, we thought that Jamf's design sort of was designed around a single master admin team delegating tasks. It wasn't designed around the silos that we use. So the standard design wasn't a perfect fit for our environment. So we thought about it. We thought about how to do it. We decided to define by IT departments, so define by these silos. It meant that it was completely flexible, and in some places a site for us is a single city, a single company. In other places a site is multiple companies, all the companies potentially across multiple countries. So it's completely flexible and it scales. So all our sites, I'll give you some examples in the next slide, but all our sites are not really like each other in their structural design. And And the biggest thing about all of this, and the reason that the silos continue to exist, is limited liability. We were really, really scared, or we really wanted to plan around. We didn't want to give, myself, even in Sydney, access to machines in London. I didn't want that responsibility because, things happen. When I was putting this presentation together, I was reminded when I first started, so I started 8 years ago, a guy had been working for Y&R Group in IT for 30 years, and on my first day, he said to me, and excuse the French, I hope, he said, everybody fucks up once, just learn from it. And it was really good advice, because for a few years, I didn't make any major mistakes that I know of. But I think 4 or 5 years into my tenure at Y&R, I accidentally uninstalled Creative Suite from every computer that I managed. That was a mistake. Easily fixed, but with Casper, but it was a mistake, and it had me sweating bullets for a couple of hours at least until it sort of filtered itself out. And so we didn't want to make that possible across the globe. And that's accidental. It only takes one disgruntled employee to do something if they've got the rights to do it as well. At Y&R, we're all extremely happy employees, and there's zero chance of a disgruntled employee doing anything, of course. But we're all familiar with RM, RF, /, and if someone had the access to all the machines potentially through scripts or something in the console, things could happen. So we had to segment these sites out, these silos, using sites. So some examples. So you've got Moscow there, which is a single company in a single city. And then AP, YRG, ANZ is the entire group essentially across Australia and New Zealand. These are separate sites. They're just a few examples, but it just shows the flexibility that we designed in using sites around the silo model. And the naming scheme is strictly enforced across the entire console. So this is not a requirement using the software, but for example, all our packages are prefixed with the site name. All our scripts, printers have prefix, and they follow that structure. So there's one thing I want to show you guys that you're all familiar with this screen, I'm sure. This is the standard screen if you've been using Casper 9 for a while. That's what's available to you when you're logged into the console as a full administrator, so across the entire console. Now, if you log in as a site administrator, you see that. So all those tasks, and they're often those things are associated with management tasks that you're using every day. They're completely unavailable, essentially, to a site admin. All they can do is configure how their display really is shown in the browser. So we're looking at that, scratching our heads, because there's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of stuff that's mandatory. And we decided that the highlighted items there are the ones that we needed to come up with a solution for. There were management tasks that are shared, or management tasks that are everyday tasks. Uploading packages, scripts, some more common than others, but all those need to be done essentially every day. And we're working with a huge number of IT departments and sites that we want to give complete autonomy to. That's a problem. They need a solution. As a side note, all the things that aren't highlighted there are still a bit of a problem. They're fixed settings essentially that we need to compromise on. For example, the check-in timing, that's a fixed setting, so we set that to 15 minutes, and that's across the entire console. We have site admins that they might have a different preference, but that's a shared item, and there's no choice. It became a problem for a few of those. With, say, for example, self-service login. That's also a setting that we had to decide upon. It was, some sites or some existing consoles were using self-service login by default. Others didn't want to go through it, didn't want to explain it to their users. So this is something we had to compromise on. And probably one of the more serious ones there is self-service plugins. To our knowledge, there's no good way to scope those. And that meant that we had to turn them off, because if you applied a self-service plugin, it was applied across the entire console to all machines. So we had guys that were using the VMware and CrashPlan and a few others, self-service plugins, and they couldn't, because it meant that everybody would see that in their self-service. So we came up with some solutions, and I'll just give you a couple examples. So I don't want to go through the entire list, but so we decided that we'd use the API that Jamf have made available, leverage it, and we created an in-house page that essentially tagged on permissions using LDAP. We're an AD organization. We use AD everywhere for LDAP, and it meant that we could have someone log into a page and basically assign a permission structure. And I'll go through that one specifically. We did a similar thing for scripts. Printers, we have a shared user that if someone wants to add a printer, they can log in as a separate user that has rights to do that across the full JSS. And that's not such a problem. I mean, the worst that can happen there is someone changes, deletes a printer. There's not a huge business risk if that's done. Then for some of the other ones, we had to set up a central team. So we use a help desk instance where we have a core team that responds to these help desk requests to set up directory bindings. And that's typically something that you probably set up once and not very often. You don't need to adjust them. So that's set up centrally. Extension attributes are the same. And that's also a bit of checking because they're also applied across the entire console. So if you want to query something on a machine, you're querying all your sites. We have these offices are all separate. They don't talk to each other a lot. And we didn't want a huge big list of extension attributes querying all the machines all the time because people would wonder why their machines are slow and they had no control over it. So those things are requested centrally and managed centrally. So our packaging page for uploading packages into the console, we've dubbed the Casper One Package Publisher. You can't see that, so I won't go through it, but there's a few steps, 6 steps to get a package from your desktop essentially into the JSS with some logic attached. This is the example. So you're logging into an intranet page. That package file is pre-filled by, we're looking at an S3 bucket that IT admins are dropping their packages into. It looks at what's there, it compares it to what's on the JSS. If a package is in that folder and not on the JSS, then it presents an option there. Site is available as a drop-down depending on your permission structure. I've logged in as an admin, so it's a bad example, but a IT admin would typically log into that and only see their site in that list. And then the rest of it is essentially just replicating what's in the JSS. We've got information like a person, and we've got a person's name and the time, so we tag that onto the notes automatically. So this is just a way to get around the restriction of uploading packages, and because we didn't want to make people full JSS administrators, and we use LDAP to log into the console. So we didn't want to make people full JSS administrators, and we needed a solution. This was it. And completed, so we uploaded the package, and that's it, just to show you that it works. As part of the implementation, we decided early on that we would use Amazon. We've got a lot of resources, but we were chatting with Jamf about possible options there. None of our existing consoles were outside our WAN. Some people had limited access JSS in the DMZ, but we thought this would bring a bit of extra functionality really to the setup, and it meant that everything's available externally. We use an S3 bucket. We have a couple of web apps, and they scale dynamically based on load. We didn't mention it to Jamf, but we use Puppet to generate configure those boxes. So we configure the JSS with Puppet, and then Jenkins manages the app. And the important one on this is the LDAP connection in the corner there. So we VPN'd back to our network for LDAP lookups, and that's because we implement LDAP across the entire console. All our staff log in with their LDAP account, and we use LDAP groups, to give IT departments access to the console and the sites. And probably the other important thing on there is it's Jamf approved, and that's probably the reason we tended to go with AWS versus other cloud competitors. Speaking to Jamf engineering, they told us they could best support it, and we support this internally. We're not using Jamf Cloud. This is our own design, but we want to be able to call Jamf in if we have to. So Jamf approved this. They said they can best deal with AWS, so that's what we did. So some challenges that we've come across. I mean, the biggest one there is Sites. It segments the console, but I don't think it segments enough. Politics to get this out. So, we actually expected a bit of resistance from existing admins. People get a bit, father-like about their consoles. Thankfully, this really wasn't the challenge that we anticipated. We had top-down support from the visionary C-level executives, and it meant that once we explained things to people, they were on board immediately. I mean, our IT admins were working with the same challenges, they could see that this was the solution. Policy-wise, we had some security policies and network policies we had to work through. I'll mention a couple coming up, and legal. There were some legal issues with using a central console across the world, and some of those segmented items, I should say non-segmented items that were fixed, there were legal implications in different countries. So to speak to the actual challenge, I guess, is for example, the AD VPN. That wasn't allowed in Y&R. We weren't allowed to, Y&R Group, we weren't allowed to do that. We weren't allowed to VPN back to a static VPN to a cloud-hosted provider. We had that exception made. We're still sort of struggling with slowness to across the VPN to AD, and that causes some small issues in the console. We're working on around that. We're thinking about putting a what's called a read-only domain controller inside AWS to get around that. We had some certificate issues around the VPN, and also around we hosted at jss.yrgroup.com, and the availability of that in a large organisation like ours, I think it can happen where we have to get passwords and approved for use, and those things just sort of slow down our rollout. Development issues, so there's pages, and we're working on more pages like them. We came across a few challenges, like for example, the file size limit using the API we were using with Amazon. There's a 5 gig file size limit. That was a bit of a problem, when you're uploading a new OS X build, it's more than 5 gigs. The capturing logs issue was an interesting one. One of those settings that's enforced across the entire console is user-based log, capturing those logs of user-based application use, I should say. And that was mandatory for a couple of places where it was part of their workflow. They used it to deploy software based on use. It's a pretty common thing. In another couple of places, I use the Germany example. We weren't allowed to capture logs. They have an HR system where their privacy is a big issue, and we weren't allowed to capture logs of the users. We had to work to get that approved. And for a while there, we thought that we couldn't compromise. We thought that we were going to disappoint people one way or the other, and we're coming up with crazy ideas like purging in the database and a few things. But thankfully, that wasn't a problem. So US-based cloud consoles, when we were starting like this, the Prism scandal was on the forefront of media, and we got lots of questions about, we're going to we're going to have this in the US. All our data is going to be in the US and on the cloud as well. We sort of quashed those concerns with legal, and anecdotally, I'm sure that all the other data was already in the US one way or the other anyway. So a lot of the point of, well, not the point of this, but one of the biggest benefits in this was encryption, and there's newer features that Jamf added using FTE setup in 10.9 meant that we were saying 10.8, or we went with 10.9 because it's the same hardware requirements. 10.9 was the minimum for across our fleet. That was decided to get this encryption and get this project done. 10.9 was the minimum. And that meant hardware cost. It's an obvious one, but it came up and we had to deal with it. Time zones. It's sort of good and bad and unexpected for us. Time zones are good. I mean, we have teams a team that spans, Asia Pacific. There's some guys in the US and in Europe. And I mean, the good out of there is we have a bit of a rolling support model. So when those central requests are coming in, we can hand it over and have 24-hour support. And it means I can go to bed, which is good. Issues, organisationally, it's always a problem to organise across time zones. In Australia, we sort of are used to it. Early morning meetings with the States, late afternoon meetings with Europe. Just an organisational challenge. But the one we didn't anticipate for that was the JSS itself has a static time zone across the entire console. And it means that if I'm looking at a policy log, it'll say completed 5 minutes ago, completed 10 minutes ago, completed on Saturday. And I'm like, oh, it's Sunday. What's going on here? And it means that there's a bit of mental gymnastics to work out what's actually happening on the console and in what time. And it's across the entire world. All our guys had a problem. We had to set a single time zone in the console, so that's GMT. We hope that Jamf sort that one out. There's a feature request open for that, I think. But I don't know. I might I can't put the pressure on for that one. So end game, the end of the project, it's still underway. We've made good progress, but it's still underway. We haven't finished it yet. And the end game is an obvious one. All our Macs are managed by a single console. The encryption process here facilitated. And everything that goes along with that, including that more consistent application. And this is more about, because our guys are in these separate silos and they do their own thing with a suite, what we're doing here is giving them the ability to apply that policy. We're not forcing policies down, we're not pushing profiles out to everybody. We're just giving people the tools to do this. And I guess that's the second one as well, or the next one. Those locations that don't have Apple technical skills. We have a lot of sites around the world, smaller sites, especially through Asia Pacific, where it can be difficult to find someone with Mac skills, or it's difficult to justify someone with a lot of Mac skills when they've got 50 PCs and 10 or 20 Macs in their office. So we're working on some ideas around that, and a central team that will push out some policies, but only for sites that don't have that capability. And the increased efficiency is a big one. We're already realising some of that. So I didn't mention it earlier, but we have a lot of redundancy through those 20 consoles. But we share, for example, a single key across our entire group for Adobe, for Microsoft, for a number of vendors. And it means that, a year ago, the Creative Suite's been packaged 20 times with the same key. And same with Microsoft. Again, same with all the little apps that are free, but the obvious one is we're sharing a key. Like, why are we not doing something here? And we realised that with some global packages in the console already. So globally, we share Creative Suite, Microsoft products, Firefox, and just the stuff that we're probably dealing with every day is all done centrally, so we can share those resources. And the end game for this project, we hope anyway, is not using any custom pages or any custom work. We would love to keep it all within the console. That's just not possible with the way that Jamf have designed it at the moment. All those items that we've had issues with, we've had to come up with solutions, and we hope that Jamf expand the feature set to cover those things in future. It'll really help the rollout. So I just want to give a shout out to some of our guys. It's not just me. I'm here presenting because I was possibly the only person that wanted to get on a 20-hour flight. Tim, Tanya, myself, Daniel, Joel, and Adam, they're all big parts of the team, and they helped immensely. I want to keep this short because I'm not sure what direction people want to go in, and I think questions might be more valuable. So thank you for listening, and throw some questions at me. Easy ones, please.
It's a small enough theater, so I think everybody can hear the questions, but we're recording the Q&A section, so I'm just going to walk around and hand you guys the mics just for the recording.
With Jamf's inability to assign buildings and departments to sites, I was wondering how much you use that functionality, or do you have a list that's 500 buildings long?
So we prefix all our buildings and network segments with the site name. and there's a big list of them. Yeah, it was the only solution we could come up with. And it does work, actually. It works quite well.
With so many computers, what type of naming convention did you have to use to be able to, know which building and such for each person?
Yeah, so the buildings and the sort of network organizational stuff is just the site prefixes. We use a naming convention there as well, where we use, say, for example, for Sydney, the building that I live in, its address is 35 Clarence Street, and so we use our site prefix with SID 35, and we use that across the entire console. It means that you can look at it and you can immediately identify what it is, and it's segmented out. And it works. It seems to work.
You're using sites for package distribution. Do you have any distribution points, and are you just using the built-in capabilities for the package distribution, or all of that's coming from Amazon?
Yeah, good question. So we looked at JDS. Anecdotally, we've used it, and we decided that it wasn't capable at this scale. So what we do is we have the S3 bucket that's got CloudFront enabled, so it's speeds it up across the entire world. It works really well, but we also have distribution points everywhere, almost. And because these sites are segmented out, we leave it up to the site owner, essentially, to do what they want to do. What I do in Australia and New Zealand, people aren't doing overseas. But I know that people will be replicating internally, usually, just purely because of bandwidth cost. Or speed is also an issue, but bandwidth cost. An issue is you can't use a cloud. You can't use a cloud distribution point for imaging, which, if you're not doing thin imaging, is a problem. But we have all sorts of distribution points. NetSUS, Ubuntu, OS X, Windows. It all just works, and they just replicate from Amazon using some binaries that are available. And I should probably mention that. So we prefix all those packages with the site name. And that means that we can, when replicating them, we can replicate only the relevant packages, which for most places will be their site packages and global, or global English.
Any other questions?
Yeah, wondering with Amazon being outside the network, how does network segmenting work then?
Yeah, network segmenting is an interesting one. Within the console, people are probably aware of this. You've got IP address and reported IP address. That's good, but it's sort of useless. What we've had to do is use network segments based on the NAT address of the site. It's been limiting in some places, but generally it's worked quite well. So each building essentially has an internet connection usually, and usually has an internet connection. Usually has one internet connection, and that means that building is essentially a network segment, and we scope distribution points and stuff like that to the NAT address of the building or the internet connection, because we had no other choice. We'd like also, I guess, in future releases for that reported IP address to be usable for that, because the reported IP address is our internal IP address, but you can't do anything with it. You can't scope to it.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is BYO knocking on your door? And are you planning to open it at all?
That's, I guess, a general policy question at our company, and at this point, the only BYOD machines that we have, we bring into the console and we manage completely and apply our policies. We essentially image them like they're company machines. And that's us locally. Other sites might apply the global policy differently.
So, hey, it might be almost the same question or same direction. So I'm wondering how you guys manage to prepare your machines. So is there a kind of standard workflow regarding imaging?
So part of the design, because of these IT silos, and we sort of wanted to leave them with their autonomy, it's really up to anyone what they want to do. I know that every single way you could do it is probably represented in what we're doing at the moment. Locally, we use theme imaging in Australia and New Zealand. We're sort of creating some best practice documentation, but really leaving it up to the IT admin. And I think that's probably what meant that we got very little resistance, because we said, look, we're not going to force anything on you. You can do whatever you like, because we can do that through sites, more or less. And yeah, continue on their workflow. I mean, some guys have a single monolithic image they're pushing down with Casper imaging. Not what I would do, but it's totally up to them. We're creating that best practice documentation for them to potentially change that, but we have no official standard across the group. That's at a later stage, I think.
So in regards to specific applications that are available for push, say Firefox or Chrome, something of that nature, that are updated every time you sneeze, we, in our company, we have a limitation based, and I know there's security risks, but based on client requirements to a specific version of Firefox. But yet we know that there are developers who need newer versions and things of that nature. So are you guys standardizing to specific versions or controlling that standard? And how are you managing the updates to those apps as they come out?
I guess the answer to that is no. And it's in a similar vein. So we really leave it up to each individual site. I mean, I can only speak for our own site, really. And we don't standardize that. We have all the options available. We typically just update, especially something like Firefox, because we don't have many dependencies in my environment. Others would likely be different, but I think the design lends to that being possible.
So my question is, did you incorporate VPP? How you doing? Did you incorporate VPP with your rollout, with your consolidation? If you did, any challenges with the multiple brands? Because I know that Apple, prefers, or I should say, sticks to a specific DUNS number, and then, with the complexity with multiple brands, I mean, did you overcome that, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not heavily used in our environment. We're typically only managing Macs, and we haven't really started looking at VPP for Macs yet. I know that because we are part of a bigger entity in Y&R Group, I know in the past we've been able to get DUNS numbers for the group, and we've shared an Apple Enterprise developer account that way. So I think it'll be possible. I mean, the thing we've been sort of grappling with there is Apple accounts in countries, and sort of deploying apps that could potentially be from a different Apple, different country's Apple account, and we're just sort of working through that now. Let's click back to that slide.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about your conversion from local JSS to AWS and how that process went for you guys.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like I said, all the 20 consoles were all in-house. I mean, ours in Sydney was hosted on OSX server, which we'd been looking at doing something about for a while, or across 2 OSX servers. Yeah, look, it was pretty seamless, to be honest. I mean, the biggest transition was probably, well, early on we were looking at it and we knew we'd have this environment set up, and it would have been nice to be able to migrate our consoles across in their entirety. We're looking at it. We changed to Jamf, and Jamf said, look, you can migrate a single console across, you can migrate a database across, and we didn't think it was fair that any one of our IT silos got their database migrated across. So we started from scratch. Setting up AWS specifically, the infrastructure side, yeah, look, it's really easy. Well, I guess easy is a dangerous word, but we didn't really run into any problems. And we have a bit of experience and in-house knowledge because we use it for our clients often. I mean, some of us within the group. So we had the experience there. It's relatively easy to set up. I mean, I would personally recommend it for rollouts like this, or even smaller rollouts, to be honest. yeah, it's quite seamless. And the only difficulty was probably setting up, or the only complexity was probably setting up the automatic scaling. Based on the load, this is a little bit more complex. But for a simple environment, there's not much to it. Running out the box and essentially doing exactly what you do in your environment in a virtual box.
Hi. About Wi-Fi configurations on your client machines, because you have different silos and stuff, are you pushing that at imaging time, or is it via self-service? Do you use machine-based certs or user-based for Wi-Fi?
Cool. Well, thankfully, profiles is one of those things that is segmented across the console. So a profile created in one site, it doesn't go across to another one. So in our site, we use profiles. We push out user-based configs because we authenticate via the user, not machine. And that could be done either way, really. It's up to the guys that push it out, and that's what we're trying to enable, being able to do that sort of stuff at their level. Because what we do with our Wi-Fi in Australia or Sydney is different to how the guys do it. I know some guys just have an SSID and password.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to say congratulations, because I'm in the middle of doing the same thing with a whole bunch of high ed institutions. And so it's real comforting to see that we've done the same thing that you guys have in adopting naming conventions and coordinating things off. I wondered, we chose a different route with site administration, with global like packages and stuff, where we just took some of the privilege away, like delete and those kinds of things, and coordinate to the team. So what were the factors that drove you to write Casper One for package management? And frankly, are you willing to share some of that code with us? Because we might be interested in that.
Look, I can chat to the developer and my boss really about open sourcing that. It's built into our intranet page, and it relies on some APIs that our intranet page was already using. But I'll have a chat to them, and maybe he'll do a bit of extra work to make it open source it. So the reason, some of the biggest reasons for why we did that was, firstly, we wanted to keep it simple, relatively simple as possible. And we use LDAP for authentication, and we wanted to essentially force people to use that naming convention. We didn't want to have to clean up after people who just didn't want to do it, or who created some packages and then they get used elsewhere and it becomes a bit of shambles. By using the naming convention and enforcing the naming convention, we have reliable reporting about if somebody's inadvertently or otherwise used a package that doesn't belong to their site. We can't enforce that, but we can report on it because we're forcing the naming scheme. They're probably the biggest factors. And I think it might be possible to give people access to the packages page and with those rights. But because we use LDAP to authenticate to the console, you can't be in multiple groups, or you can't put a LDAP user in a group that can do both things. So yeah, we thought about it, we assessed it, and we had the skills to do it, so we decided to do it. Partly also because we plan on, other pages are in development that will use the API, and we sort of bring it all into one box. And it worked for us. Results may vary.
Okay, and just one follow-on comment. I can highly recommend it if you're moving from consoles to this kind of unified, to actually do the clean break and go, because we did a migration for one of our units and it required some cleanup afterwards. Let's just say that. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely as well. Clean break was fantastic, and everybody that comes on board with their clean break recreates their console and just cleans it up. Does maintenance that potentially you sort of don't do.
Hey, so I have a question about file encryption. As you moved machines into the new instance of the JSS, did you have to go back, unencrypt, and then re-encrypt each machine after they joined into the JSS? I'm kind of facing that same sort of scenario now, and I'm just curious about how you solved it.
Yeah, so we have, we initially were planning on doing it that way, but in some locations they had a policy where whenever they're encrypting a machine, they have to back it up completely. I didn't personally think that was necessary. It's a decision that can be made on the local level. So it meant that we sort of, our idea was we wanted to have the single institutional key as well as the individual keys. And it meant that we would have to, unencrypt and re-encrypt to do that. We relented a little bit, and we bring them in as they are, and we just report on them as not using that standard setup. So we have reports in the console that are encrypted with our central key, encrypted but not with our central key. And as they get re-imaged or as maintenance comes along, they'll get the central keys. So we didn't do it.
Hi. So I'm wondering, as far as print driver deployment and kind of the concept of using shared user is interesting. Are you guys deploying like work group only printers, or are you like pushing out specific individual like devices?
Individual printers. And I didn't mention in there, but we don't allow Casper admin to be used anywhere. Reliably, only one person can log into Casper admin at a time. We have a box in a colo near Amazon for when Casper admin has to be used, like uploading a global package, converting it to an OS X installer. So converting an OS X installer. But those printers need to be created through the page. And the PPDs, it's a little bit more difficult to do it through the console itself, specifying the PPD. But they're done on an individual level, and that's the way we had to do it with the console.
So each of your sites is managing their own packaging, is that right? Because you have prefixes for those locations?
Yes, yes.
So does that mean then you've got multiple redundancies of, say, this week's Flash or this week's Firefox? And
we do somewhat. I mean, we have some global packages that sort of core team puts together. So, people we don't mandate use of that. So we do have places where we have. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but we do definitely have redundancy in some packages. And also, we recommend that you use the Firefox package, and if you want to add preferences, you create your own preference package and do it separately. But there's definitely some redundancy. I mean, we've reduced redundancy incredibly by standardizing some global packages. But yeah, there has to be. Thankfully, with the naming scheme, they sit. I mean, not only when you look at the console, you see them in a grouping because they're prefixed with the name. So it doesn't really, visually it's not a problem. S3 bucket, the cost isn't significant. And yeah.
Okay. I just had one other. Y&R, is this project strictly isolated to Y&R? Or, because I'm aware of, the larger organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so, or is this like, because they must have similar needs and interests outside of Y&R.
Yeah.
So is this like a pilot for?
That's a great question. I can't answer that, and I don't even want to speculate.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I don't know. They're doing their own thing. Y&R Group's a massive group.
Right. And so is the parent company, from what I understand.
Parent company's even bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there are similar needs out there. I'm not sure what other people are doing within the group. I speak to people within our group. It's a convoluted process, convoluted structure, but I don't know.
I mean, the volume and scale is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly impressive on, in that group. But to think about that there's, even more out there under a parent, company umbrella.
And Y&R Groups, the entire group is 180-odd thousand users. We designed this to scale, but not really we don't plan on taking it. I don't know. It's designed to scale. That's all I can say to that. Sorry.
I'll just ask one more question and make a comment. I've found that in the deployment we have, that administrators learn which other administrators' packages they can trust, and so redundancy gets reduced that way a lot for us. Are you trying to look at or starting to use auto packager and feed stuff in yet to automate that piece of it and also reduce some redundancy?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a logical solution, right? It sounds like you guys have come across the same problems. Yeah, it's a logical solution, probably for everybody really, and just makes more sense as you get bigger.
Any other questions? We still have maybe 10 minutes or so.
We're in the very early stages of a similar conversion to what you've gone through, and part of this is going to be for my boss who's going to be watching this video later on. Your personal preference, you talked about LDAP and the latency issue. If you had to do it over again, would you be putting a domain controller in AWS, or would you continue with the VPN?
Yeah, I would definitely try and put it inside from the start. Again, I don't know whether we'll ever be able to get one inside. It's a pretty strict policy not to do that. Read-only DCs are not allowed in our environment. We're working on that. Yeah, although in saying that, I don't know if it would solve the problem. It probably will, but without knowing definitively, I would definitely try it first.
Considering that you can't really do network segmentation, and you can't really use recon properly to pull in new machines or machines that are not, sort of fallen off, imaging seems to be crucial in this process, right? For the different districts, the different regions to actually use imaging properly. Do you have certain guidelines? Do you have that you use that the different regions have to use to be able to get their machines on properly, or a script or some kind?
Yeah, great question. I didn't mention it, but the only thing we do is, so you can create a quick add package for a site, and so it doesn't matter how you get your machines in, you just have to use a quick add package, and yeah, it also helps the transition using the quick add package to sending out a quick add package from your old console to get all those machines across, and they just fall into the right site. So the quick add package is the solution there.
Any others? Okay.
Are you guys looking at a way to globally migrate all these machines to 1010 all at once, or through self-service of some sort of method? Maybe difficult, but...
That's one where we're testing it right now, actually. The JSS needs to be upgraded to do that properly. That's one where we'll probably try and offer it as an option and send it out. It's a large package to cache from AWS, so it's something that I think we're talking about sort of designing a workflow and making it available with the package sitting in there. So we can say to sites, look, if you want to do this, use this package and do it like this. And they can just do that in a few minutes and they're done. And that's a tested workflow, so they don't have to test it. Yeah, that's what we're planning on doing. And that again, will really help the efficiency.
And also the apps like Java,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, that too.
Okay, so we'll just kind of wrap it up here. If you guys have questions, as with all the sessions, you can go to the Jamf Nation page for this particular session. And there's a discussion board there. If there are any requests for some of the information, like there's the question about getting the logic or the code behind it. Some of that stuff, if you guys have questions or their requests for the slide deck or whatever, I'm sure we'll use the Jamf Nation page to kind of facilitate that conversation. And then lunch is right after this, so if you guys have any questions or want to have further discussions, I'm sure David and myself will make ourselves available. So yeah, we'll wrap that up, and good job, David. A lot of cool stuff you guys got going on.
Thank you.